Welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad, and let's begin the bulletin with Syria. 12 civilians have been killed in airstrikes in the northwestern Idlib province. 2 children are among the dead. War monitors say 28 others were injured in the attack. The monitors say government forces targeted 2 residential buildings. Meanwhile, 6 government soldiers were killed in a suicide bombing. State media says the attack happened during a raid against militants in southern Daraa province. The UN says more than 400,000 people have been displaced by violence in northwestern Syria over the past 3 months. Moving on to Pakistan, where 6 soldiers have been martyred in firing by terrorists from across the Afghan border. The military said an army patrol came under attack in the North Waziristan tribal district. Meanwhile, 4 paramilitary soldiers were martyred by militants during a combing operation in southwestern Balochistan province. Military spokesman Major General Asif Ghafoor says the soldiers' martyrdom represents Pakistan's ongoing sacrifices for regional peace. In Afghanistan, 4 security personnel have been killed in a car bombing outside district administration headquarters in eastern Ghazni province. Police say 20 other security officials were wounded in the attack. Now, officials say a suicide bomber detonated a car filled with explosives near the gate of the government office in the Ab Band district. They say the death toll from the attack may rise, and the Taliban have claimed responsibility. In another development, Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif is hosting his Omani counterpart Yusuf bin Alawi in Tehran amid mounting tensions in the region. Zarif said he and Alawi discussed the latest regional and international developments. The visit comes after Oman offered to mediate between Iran and the UK on the tanker issue. Let's move on to the UK, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson has asked the European Union to drop the Irish backstop to strike a Brexit deal. Johnson spoke about improving public services and driving up economic growth during his visit to Manchester. The backstop is meant to ensure that the Irish border remains open, whatever the outcome of talks of the EU and EU's future relationship. Johnson has warned that if the EU refuses to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement, he will take Britain out of the bloc on October the 31st without a deal.
If we get rid of the backstop, whole and entire, then we're making a lot of progress. That would be my answer. And as for whether my friends across the channel are warming to me, well, I've always had very good relations. I'm sometimes slightly mystified by some of the obiter dicta that I read and some of the off-the-record commentary that I see. I have very friendly relations with other EU foreign ministers already and with EU leaders as well.
And meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel has invited the UK's new Prime Minister to discuss Brexit. This comes after they spoke on the telephone about Boris Johnson's plans to leave the European Union in October with or without a deal. Now, despite Johnson's claims that he can obtain better terms, Merkel and other EU leaders are adamant that the terms of Britain's exit cannot be renegotiated. US President Donald Trump has said that talks about a substantial trade deal with the UK are underway. Following a telephone conversation with Boris Johnson, Trump said the new Prime Minister will do greatly in office. More in this report.
Trump said a bilateral deal with post-Brexit Britain could lead to a tremendous increase in trade. He said US-UK trade had previously been impeded by Britain's membership of the EU. Johnson and Trump agreed to start talks as soon as possible after the UK leaves the European Union.
We're working already on a trade agreement, and I think it'll be a very substantial trade agreement. You know, we can do with the UK, we can do 3 to 4 times. We were actually impeded by their relationship with the European Union. We were very much impeded on trade.
Trump and Johnson have also discussed tensions with Iran and the need for the 2 countries to work together on the issue.
BRICS countries say the UN should safeguard the interests of emerging markets and developing countries. In a meeting in Brazil, the foreign ministers of the bloc's members agreed to enhance mutual cooperation and protect multilateralism. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says unilateralism and bullying tactics are challenging global trade and causing uncertainty in the world. He says members of the Emerging Economies Organization should uphold the global order based on international law. And heading to South Asia, the death toll from seasonal monsoon storms has jumped to over 670. Excessive flooding in Bangladesh has killed 114 people so far. Since the monsoon arrived earlier this month, landslides, flooding and lightning have killed 470 people in India. Another 100 have died in Nepal, and in Pakistan, over 35 people have lost their lives in flash floods and building collapses. In another natural disaster, 8 people have been killed and 60 others are injured after 2 earthquakes struck the northern Philippines. Buildings were also damaged when 2 tremors with a magnitude of 5.4 and 5.9 hit the Batanes province. The Philippines National Disaster Agency says the first quake killed 5 people, while 3 others died as a result of the aftershocks. It says the rescue teams have started operations in the affected area. No tsunami warnings have been issued. While Red Crescent rescue workers have recovered the bodies of 62 migrants off the Libyan coast a day after their boat capsized in the Mediterranean. The UN's International Organization for Migration said 110 people are still missing or feared dead. The Libyan Navy earlier rescued 137 survivors. Most of the passengers were from African and Arab countries. The head of the UN's refugee agency, Filippo Grandi, says this is the worst such tragedy in the Mediterranean this year. Now, Libya is a major conduit for African migrants and refugees seeking a better life in Europe. Israeli forces have killed a Palestinian man during weekly protests along the Gaza border. The Palestinian Health Ministry says the 23-year-old was hit in the stomach with a live round and died at a hospital in Gaza. It says 40 others were injured when Israeli troops fired live ammunition and rubber bullets at the protesters. The demonstrators were calling for Israel to lift its blockade of the territory. Israeli police also detained 7 Palestinians from the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Issawieh. Officials say over 300 Palestinians have been killed since the start of weekly protests last year. In Iraq, 3 people have been killed in 2 bombings in the northern Kirkuk and central Saladin provinces. 10 others sustained life-threatening injuries in the deadly attacks. Now, police officials say 2 civilians were killed and 7 others wounded by a roadside bomb in Kirkuk. In Saladin, a civilian was killed and 3 others were injured after a bomb went off at an amusement park in the city of Baiji. No group has claimed responsibility yet. While the war-torn Iraqi city of Mosul is slowly recovering 2 years after its liberation from ISIS militants, the city's infrastructure is in the process of being rebuilt. More in this report.
Mosul's oldest area saw the hardest battles between government soldiers and ISIS extremists in the struggle to free the city. After a couple of years, Mosul is coming back to life as many displaced residents have gradually returned. The water supply and electricity have mostly been restored. In the city center, the 2 bridges over the Tigris River connecting the eastern and western parts of the city have been fixed. While some neighborhoods have been revived, there are others that still remain desolate.
When we came back here, there were ruins everywhere. We cleared the place up when we returned home. This was a year ago.
The Great Mosque of Al-Nouri and residential areas in the city's old town still look like a battlefield. During the fight, hospitals and government buildings became government carry bases, which haven't yet been rebuilt.
The problem now is that we do not have hospitals or schools. The houses have all collapsed.
The scars of war that crisscross the city suggest reconstruction will still be the city's main preoccupation for years to come.
In Tunisia, thousands of people have gathered at the streets of capital Tunis to bid farewell to their first elected president, Beji Caid Essebsi. Essebsi died at the age of 92. Prime Minister Youssef Chahed has declared a 7-day mourning period and ordered flags at state institutions to be lowered to half-mast. Foreign leaders and delegates have also attended the state funeral, and the late president's coffin was placed on a military truck in the palace of Carthage. Essebsi helped guide the North African country's transition to democracy after the revolution of 2011. Russian police have detained hundreds of opposition activists ahead of a planned demonstration in Moscow. The authorities had declared the gathering illegal. Moscow police made the arrests to prevent protests against the exclusion of opposition candidates from municipal elections in September. Many opposition candidates have not been listed on the ballots on the ground that they lacked enough signatures on nomination papers. Now, thousands of protesters in Hong Kong have taken to the streets despite a police ban. They marched through Yuen Long, a northern town where pro-democracy protesters were attacked by armed masked men last week. 45 people were injured in the attack, which was widely blamed on Triad gang members. Protesters accused the police of turning a blind eye and colluding with the attackers. Police fired tear gas to disperse the angry protesters. Hong Kong has seen several weeks of protests sparked by a row over a controversial extradition bill. Over to Colombia, thousands of people have rallied across the country to protest the killing of hundreds of human rights activists since 2016. Many of those killed were supporters of environmental causes working to combat illegal mining and drug trafficking. Demonstrators gathered in major cities, including the capital, Bogota, under the slogan of defending the peace. Protesters blew horns, demanding that the government and international community take action over the killing of activists. The killings followed the signing of a historic peace deal with FARC guerrillas. Moving on to the US, where the Supreme Court has allowed President Donald Trump to spend Pentagon funds to build a wall on its southern border. The court ruled by 5 votes to 4 to override a decision by a California federal judge to block the funds. The Trump administration can now spend $2.5 billion on wall projects in California, Arizona, and New Mexico. In a tweet, Trump described the ruling as a big victory. Meanwhile, the US and Guatemala have signed a migration deal on Central American asylum seekers. Under the agreement, migrants from Honduras and El Salvador passing through Guatemala will be required to first stop there and seek asylum. In another development, US President Donald Trump says he is not concerned about North Korea's recent missile tests. More details in this report.
U.S. President Donald Trump says Thursday's missile launch do not pose any threat to the United States. He highlighted his strong personal ties with North Korea's chairman, Kim Jong-un.
Well, you said it. They're short-range missiles, and my relationship is very good with Chairman Kim, and we'll see what happens, but they are short-range missiles, and many people have those missiles. Nope, not at all.
Earlier, Chairman Kim said the missile tests were a warning to South Korea to halt joint military exercises with the United States.
South Korea has commemorated the 66th anniversary of the Korean War armistice. The ceasefire halted 3 years of fighting between the US-led United Nations forces, which were backing South Korea, and Chinese and North Korean forces. South Korea's Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon said his government will continue to work for peace on the Korean peninsula. The ceasefire has never become a peace treaty, leaving the two countries in a technical state of war. The UN command in South Korea also observed the armistice anniversary in the village of Panmunjom, where the truce was signed in 1953. Well, the World Health Organization has declared electronic cigarettes and heated tobacco products unhelpful in the fight against cancer. A A WHO report has urged smokers and governments not to trust claims from cigarette firms about their latest products. Indus News has this report.
The report accuses the tobacco industry of being an aggressive and well-resourced opposition to tobacco control measures. The World Health Organization Program Manager Vinayak Prasad said misleading branding of tobacco products is aimed at growing their market share.
That the industry is claiming it to be a way to quit, but the evidence is not showing it. The evidence in the US, for example, is that they were liberal to open the market for electronic cigarettes for almost like 7-8 years.
The World Health Organization says e-cigarettes are contrary to claims made by their manufacturers and are just like other tobacco products.
In New Zealand, thousands of people are still occupying disputed land in a protest over Indigenous Maori rights. The demonstrators are demanding protection for sacred land to stop it being turned into a housing development. Thousands of Indigenous Maoris have taken over a site they say is sacred to prevent it going under concrete. Protests were held against the construction company Fletcher Building on Auckland's Ihumatau Peninsula. Singing songs and chanting slogans, protesters have occupied the disputed land for at least 2 years.
First of all, bring soul to the table. Stop ignoring the people here. You can't just make it like this is not happening. You've got to bring the people to the table.
The Ihumatau Peninsula is located near the Auckland International Airport. Fletcher Building has started a project that intends to develop 500 houses on the disputed land.
As the landowner, we welcome dialogue. We've always welcomed dialogue. We've been working with Mana Whenua for a considerable amount of time now, and the hui today was a reinforcement of that. So I think that what we've done is, as a result of that hui, we've said we won't go ahead and do any further work on the site.
The area is a significant archaeological site and includes New Zealand's earliest market garden. While farmers in Syria's East Ghouta region are trying to return to normal life, government forces established control over the area in April 2018 after it was taken by rebels in 2012, but years of war have devastated the farmland.
The Aston Martin DB5 is a British luxury Grand Tourer designed by Italian coach builder Carrozzeria Touring Superleggera, but it was modified for Bond movies. The vehicle has undergone 13 rear screen. This car was never seen in Bond films, but matches the one that 007 drove in the movies Goldfinger and Thunderball.
The car behind me was used in both Goldfinger and Thunderball, the iconic Sean Connery portrayal of James Bond. We've got 13 functional gadgets on this car, ranging from 30 caliber machine guns to nail dispensers to ejector seats. Let's take a look.
RM Sotheby's said the Bond modifications had been properly refurbished to function as originally built. The car has had 3 careful private owners in over 50 years.
This is one of the most significant cars produced of all time, appropriately titled in the famous book, The Most Famous Car in the World. This is really the first example of product placement in all of, film and public advertising that I can really think of. And the James Bond franchise is the most iconic. It's known with the DB5. It is the most significant car in the world. The estimate for sale next month in Pebble Beach is $4 to $6 million.
The auction will take place on August the 15th in Monterey, California.
Well, surely anyone would be lucky to own one of those cars, but let's move on. People in Myanmar celebrated the inclusion of the ancient city of Bagan as a World Heritage Site in a unique manner. They bicycled around the city and collected rubbish which was littered around the temples. Bagan includes more than 3,500 stupas, temples, monasteries and other structures built in the Middle Ages. Myanmar has been trying to include the city in UNESCO's list for quite a while now, but it was approved just now. To show their joy, riders from across the country promoted the ancient city as a tourist heritage spot worth protecting.
I am a Muslim, but the fact Bagan has been named a World Heritage Site is not about religion. We are all from different religions and responsible for it. I would like to request all people to take care of Bagan together. That's why we are riding bicycles to promote this site.
This will give a significant boom to the country's tourist industry. This is Myanmar's second addition to the World Heritage List.
Since the 1975 earthquake hit Bagan, we have had no effective preservation of the pagodas. Now Bagan is safe under international protection. Frankly, we can't protect this town alone. We are so glad it is now protected by UNESCO. This is the right time for Bagan.
But there are tough challenges ahead as UNESCO requires the country to make preservation plans as per international standards. The country had failed to convince the world body in the past. Well, first up in the world of business, China has signed a memorandum of understanding with Mali to cooperate under the Belt and Road Initiative. The BRI aims to building a trade and infrastructure network connecting Asia with Europe and Africa. The MOU was signed by Chinese Ambassador Zhu Liying and Mali's Minister of Foreign Affairs Tibal Drame in the Malian capital, Bamako. Mali's President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita was also present. Under the memorandum, both sides will cooperate in infrastructure, trade and people-to-people communications. The U.S. Justice Department has approved a $26 billion merger between wireless network operators T-Mobile and Sprint. The companies have agreed to create a new wireless carrier after selling their assets to the satellite TV provider Dish Network. This will also be able to access T-Mobile's network for 7 years. Following the announcement, T-Mobile stocks hit an all-time high of more than $85. Sprint shares also gained $8 and Dish Network stocks climbed by as much as 3.5%. However, a group of U.S. state attorneys have filed a lawsuit with a federal court to block the merger. They argue that the join-up would cost consumers more than $4.5 billion a year. And Chinese telecoms giant Huawei has launched its first 5G mobile phone for commercial use. The phone will hit the market on August the 16th, and the company says it has started taking domestic orders for the Mate 20X smartphone, priced at nearly $900. China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology issued 5G licenses to 4 major telecom operators in June. China is set to become the world's largest 5G market, with 460 million users expected by 2025. Well, India's textile hub Surat is in crisis after the closure of some 50 factories in a year. The imposition of a goods and services tax has increased the cost of textiles, cooling consumer demand. More in this report.
India's textile industry is writing under the cost of a goods and services tax. The nationwide 5% levy was imposed on the previously tax-exempt textile industry 2 years ago. Since then, 50 of the nearly 350 textile mills that once thrived in Surat have shut down. Even those still working are operating at well under capacity.
The 60 process houses which have closed down are only just recent ones. After implementation of GST, nearly 90 to 100 process houses have been shut down. Even the ones still operating are only working on their 60% capacity at the best. The market is absolutely silent. This is a festive season, and still they are putting out only 3 batches a week.
Industry experts say even India's forthcoming celebration of the Festival of Lights will only grant a temporary relief.
If the industry picks up pace till Diwali festival, then this phase of mills shutting down will stop. However, if it doesn't, then our cost is increasing every day. And if we can't sell and get the right amount for it, then the industry will face problems again.
The sales tax imposed in 2017 has made it complicated for door-to-door salesmen to work. That has effectively killed off a key marketing avenue for Surat's textile industry.
And first up in sports, Peru is hosting its first Pan Am Games. The event began with an opening ceremony that paid homage to the past while looking at the future. 6,000 athletes from 41 countries are participating in the event. The United States are again expected to dominate the Games, with Canada and China chasing them. The US will have a 643-member team, boasting 19 Olympic champions and 34 medalists. The Games will also include some top athletes in non-Olympic sports. 4,981 medals will be awarded across the Pan Am and Para-Pan Am Games. In football, Barcelona have defeated Vissel Kobe 2-0 in an international friendly in Japan. Inter Milan have drawn their match with Paris Saint-Germain, and 21-year-old Carlos Perez netted twice for Barcelona. Former Barca players Andre Iniesta, David Villa and Sergi Samper played for Vissel Kobe in the match. In another fixture, Samuele Longo scored a last-minute goal to help Inter draw against PSG. America's Caleb Dressel has won the 50-meter freestyle at the FINA World Swimming Championships. Dressel completed the race in 21.04 seconds, making him the third best performer of all time behind Cesar Cielo and Fred Bosquet. Bruno Fritus of Brazil and Christian Gokolomiev of Greece tied for silver. This is Dressel's fourth gold and fifth medal overall in this year's swimming championships. Earlier this week, Dressel took gold medals in the 100-meter freestyle, 50 meters butterfly and 4x100-meter freestyle. And for the gamers out there, the finals of the Fortnite World Cup are underway at the Arthur Ashe Stadium in New York. The winner will win a prize pool of $3 million, which is the biggest ever for an esports event. 100 finalists from 30 countries have been selected out of 40 million entrants. Each finalist will take home at least $50,000. The 4 top-placed finishers will become millionaires by the end of the tournament. And in athletics, Christian Coleman has won the 100-meter race title at the U.S. National Championships with another sub-10-second performance. World silver medalist Coleman crossed the finish line in 9.99 seconds ahead of Mike Rogers and Christopher Belcher. All three have qualified to represent the U.S. at the World Championships in Doha in September. Well, the weather is humid here in Lahore, but let's take a look at what the weather's like around the world. Well, that was all I have from the news bulletin at the moment, but do stay tuned to Indus News for further updates. I'll be back with the headlines in just a few minutes. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned.